The unseen battle begins. Amara woke up to the distant hum of morning traffic outside her bedroom window. The early sun barely peeked through the faded curtains, casting a muted golden glow across her small room. She stretched under the thin covers, dreading the day ahead even before her feet touched the cold wooden floor. She knew how it would go. It had been happening for weeks now, maybe even months. Every morning, she would stand at the curb, waiting for the school bus, and every morning, Mr. Callahan, the middle-aged, heavy-set driver with a face carved from stone, would act as though she were invisible. Sometimes, he would slow down, just enough to make her think he would stop, only to speed up again, leaving her standing there with the choking dust and the sting of humiliation. Today, though, something in her gut told her it would be different. She wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. Amara pulled herself out of bed and walked to the old, scratched-up mirror above her dresser. She grabbed her brush, running it through her thick, coiled hair. The reflection staring back at her was one of quiet defiance. Dark brown eyes filled with the silent frustration of someone who had been tested time and time again. Skin smooth, deep, and rich, but marked by the scars of invisible battles no one ever acknowledged, but ones she had been fighting all her life. She sighed and pulled her braids into a tight ponytail before throwing on her school uniform, a navy blue skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a blazer slightly too big for her frame. It had once belonged to her older sister, who had outgrown it years ago. As she walked downstairs, the smell of breakfast wrapped around her like a warm hug. Scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and the faint aroma of fresh coffee. Her mother, Linda, stood by the counter, flipping through the morning newspaper, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "Morning, sweetheart," Linda said, looking up with a small smile. Amara managed a nod as she slid into the chair across from her. "Eat up," her mother urged, pushing a plate of eggs toward her. "You have a long day ahead." Amara picked at her toast but didn't immediately eat. Her mother noticed the hesitation. "Still no luck with the bus?" Linda asked, her voice careful. Amara hesitated before answering. "I don't know. Maybe today will be different." Her mother didn't look convinced. They had talked about this before, about how unfair it was, about how the world didn't always play by the rules when it came to people like them. Linda had fought many battles in her own life, and she had always taught her daughters to stand their ground. Amara knew she should have told her mother everything, the way Mr. Callahan would sneer, the way the other students in the bus would laugh when he ignored her. But there were things that words couldn't capture. Things that, when spoken aloud, would only make the wounds feel deeper. Linda sighed, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "If he ignores you again today, we're reporting him." Amara swallowed and nodded. She didn't want trouble. She just wanted to get to school like everyone else. Outside, the chill of the morning air bit at her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself as she stood at the familiar spot at the end of the street. A few kids from her neighborhood had already left in their parents' cars, but she had no such luxury. Then, in the distance, she saw the school bus rounding the corner. The familiar yellow vehicle rumbled toward her, its engine roaring as it slowed near her stop. She could see the kids inside, their faces pressed against the windows. Some watching with curiosity. Others pretending not to see her at all. She took a step forward, heart pounding. Mr. Callahan looked right at her. And then, as if it were the easiest thing in the world, he pressed his foot against the gas pedal. The bus rolled forward, right past her. Not again. Amara's stomach tightened, anger rising in her throat like bile. Something inside her snapped. This time, she wasn't just going to stand there. She grabbed the strap of her backpack and started running. Her legs pounded against the pavement, her breath coming fast and hard as she chased after the bus. She wasn't going to let him win. The students inside noticed her now. A few pointed, some laughed, others pressed their faces against the glass, their mouths forming words she couldn't hear. Mr. Callahan must have seen her too. Because suddenly, with a screech of brakes, the bus came to a hard stop. Amara barely had time to react before the doors swung open with a loud hiss. She slowed, heart hammering, as she approached the entrance. Mr. Callahan sat in his seat, looking down at her with cold, beady eyes. He was a man in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and a gut that hung over his belt. He chewed on something, gum, maybe, or a piece of hard candy. His lips curled into a smirk. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" His voice was rough, sharp. "I'm getting on the bus," Amara said, forcing her voice to stay steady. A beat of silence. And then he laughed. A cruel, mocking sound that made the kids inside the bus snicker along with him. "You're not getting on this bus." His words were slow, deliberate. Amara's fingers clenched into fists. "This is my bus stop," she said firmly. "You're supposed to pick me up." His smirk faded into a look of irritation. "Get lost." Amara didn't move. Something burned in her chest, something bigger than just the frustration of being left behind. She had been told no too many times. She had been ignored, pushed aside, treated as though she didn't belong. But today, she had had enough. "I said I'm getting on," she repeated, stepping onto the first step of the bus. That was when it happened. Faster than she could react, Mr. Callahan shoved her back. Hard. Her foot slipped. Her body tumbled backward, her backpack weighing her down. The world tilted, and the next thing she knew, she was on the ground, pain shooting up her side as she landed on the cold pavement. Gasps filled the air. Someone screamed. The laughter stopped. For a moment, everything was silent except for the distant hum of morning traffic. Amara blinked up at the sky, dazed, the ache spreading through her body. And then she heard a voice. Not Mr. Callahan's. Not the student's. But her mother's. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Amara's head snapped up. Linda was there. She must have seen the whole thing. And from the look on her face, Mr. Callahan had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The fire within. The air around them seemed to freeze. A hush had fallen over the street, the sound of distant honking cars now muffled under the weight of what had just happened. Amara's body ached from the fall, but it was nothing compared to the sting of humiliation burning through her chest. She could feel eyes on her, watching, judging. The kids inside the bus, their faces pressed against the glass. Some shocked. Some amused. And Mr. Callahan, still seated in his high perch, looking down at her like she was nothing more than a piece of trash on the sidewalk. But it was her mother's voice that cut through the thick silence like a blade. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Linda's heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she stormed toward them, her coat billowing behind her like a warrior's cape. Her usually warm, brown eyes were burning with fury. Mr. Callahan barely spared her a glance, huffing as he reached for the lever to close the doors. "This isn't your concern, lady. Move along." But Linda wasn't moving. In fact, she was already stepping in front of the doors before they could shut. Her voice was steel. "Get out of that bus. Now." The students inside the bus had gone completely silent. Some even pulled out their phones, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. Mr. Callahan scoffed, throwing his arms up in irritation. "I don't have time for this. Your little girl was causing trouble." "Trouble?" Linda snapped, her voice razor sharp. "Is that what you call shoving a child? Assaulting a student on school property? Do you realize how serious this is?" The word assault seemed to get his attention. For the first time, Mr. Callahan's smug expression wavered. He shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Linda turned to Amara and knelt down beside her, her expression instantly softening. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Amara swallowed hard, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. But she wouldn't let them fall. She refused to cry, not here, not in front of him. She nodded stiffly. Linda helped her up, brushing the dirt off her daughter's uniform before turning back to the driver. "I'm going to say this once," she said, standing tall. "You're going to apologize. Right now." Mr. Callahan let out a short, bitter laugh. "Apologize? Lady, you people always want to act like victims." Before he could finish that sentence, Linda took a step closer. The look in her eyes stopped him mid-breath. "If you think for a second that I'm going to let this slide, you have no idea who you're dealing with," she said, her voice low and deadly calm. "You put your hands on my daughter. You refused to pick her up for weeks. You think I haven't noticed? You think I wasn't going to find out?" Her voice was rising now, and Amara could see her mother's journalist instincts kicking in. "Here's what's going to happen," Linda continued. "You are going to open those doors and let my daughter take her seat, like every other student on this bus. You are going to drive her to school, like your job requires you to. And when you get there, you are going to explain to the principal why you thought it was acceptable to put your hands on a student." A vein pulsed in Mr. Callahan's temple. He looked furious now, his face darkening. "You don't tell me how to do my job, lady. And you don't get to abuse children and think no one will hold you accountable." Linda pulled out her phone, raising it up so he could see the red recording icon blinking. "I've been recording since the moment I walked up here," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Every single word. Every excuse. Every threat. So, tell me, Mr. Callahan, do you really want to keep digging your own grave?" A flicker of hesitation crossed the bus driver's face. He licked his lips, his eyes darting to the kids inside the bus, then back to Linda. For the first time, he looked uncertain. But still, his pride kept him rooted in his seat. "I don't care if you have a damn video," he muttered. "Nothing's going to happen to me." Linda smirked, shaking her head. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Mr. Callahan blinked. "I'm Linda Davis, senior journalist at the New York Tribune," she said coolly. "I expose people like you for a living. So trust me when I say, this story? It's going to be bigger than you could ever imagine." A slow realization dawned on his face. The color drained from his skin. You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," Linda shot back. "By this afternoon, your name is going to be everywhere. Every newspaper. Every local news station. Every social media platform. And let me tell you, Callahan, people don't take kindly to racist bus drivers who assault children." Mr. Callahan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The kids inside the bus were now whispering amongst themselves, their eyes wide with excitement. Some of them were grinning, watching as their once untouchable bus driver started to crumble. Linda took a step back and folded her arms. "So, what's it going to be? Are you going to let my daughter on this bus? Or do you want to lose your job today?" Mr. Callahan sat frozen, his knuckles white against the wheel. His entire face was red, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. And then, finally, he reached for the door lever. With a sharp hiss, the doors swung open. Linda turned to Amara. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Amara hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of something else. Something deeper. A part of her wanted to walk away. A part of her wanted to say, "No. I'm not stepping onto this bus after everything he's done." But then she thought about what it meant. This wasn't about Callahan. This was about her. Her right to be there. To belong. She lifted her chin and, with slow, deliberate steps, climbed onto the bus. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the weight of every single pair of eyes on her. Some filled with admiration. Others with guilt. But one thing was clear, they saw her now. She wasn't invisible anymore. She walked down the aisle, feeling the shift in the air, the newfound respect from students who had once ignored her struggle. When she reached an empty seat, she sat down, back straight, heart steady. Linda turned to Mr. Callahan one last time. "You'll be hearing from me," she said, before stepping away from the bus. And as the doors shut and the engine roared back to life, Amara let out a slow breath. This wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. The spark that ignites a fire. The school bus rumbled forward, but the air inside was thick with tension. The usual chatter was absent. No one laughed, no one whispered about their morning routines, and no one dared to make eye contact with Amara. She sat rigidly in her seat, gripping the strap of her backpack as she stared out the window. The bruising ache in her side from the fall throbbed with every bump the bus hit, but she refused to show even a flicker of pain. This wasn't just another morning. This wasn't just another slight to brush off and forget. This was the moment everything changed. She glanced toward the front of the bus, where Mr. Callahan gripped the steering wheel with a furious scowl. His knuckles were white, his jaw tight. He had lost today, but something about the way his eyes darted toward the rearview mirror, locking onto Amara's reflection, sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't over. She knew men like him. They didn't take humiliation lightly. The murmurs started small, rippling through the seats like a silent storm brewing beneath the surface. Some students were typing furiously on their phones, likely texting their friends about what had just happened. Others exchanged quiet, wide-eyed glances, as if still trying to process what they had witnessed. Amara could hear snippets of whispers. "Did you see her, Mom? She tore him apart. He actually shoved her. That's crazy. Think he's gonna get fired?" The last one lingered in the air. Would he? Would this actually be the end of his reign? Amara exhaled slowly and turned toward the window again. The city streets blurred past her, but she wasn't really seeing them. Her mind was racing. Her mother had done something powerful today. For once, someone had stood up for her, and it felt good. But at the same time, a gnawing worry twisted in her gut. What if this just made things worse? What if Mr. Callahan wanted revenge? She shook the thought away. No. I won't let fear control me. The bus jolted to a stop in front of the school, and as the doors hissed open, students hesitated before standing. Normally, they'd push and shove their way out, eager to escape the crammed vehicle. But today, something was different. They all looked at Amara. Like she was someone worth noticing now. Like she mattered. She squared her shoulders and stood, stepping into the aisle with calm confidence. She didn't rush, didn't lower her head. She walked. Deliberate. Measured. Strong. As she neared the front of the bus, she could feel the heat of Callahan's glare burning into her skin. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his teeth grinding audibly. She stopped right beside his seat, forcing him to acknowledge her presence. For the first time, she had power. For the first time, he had no choice but to see her. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Callahan," she said coolly, her voice steady. His face darkened, but she didn't wait for a response. She stepped off the bus, the sun hitting her skin, and walked through the school gates. Behind her, the bus doors slammed shut, but the echo of them only fueled the fire within her. Today was different. And there was no turning back. Inside the school, the storm grows. The news had already spread. By the time Amara walked into the school halls, it was clear the entire student body had heard about what happened. People stared as she passed, their heads turning in waves. Some looked at her with respect, some with curiosity, and others with a discomfort they couldn't quite place. She wasn't sure how she felt about it. For so long, she had been invisible. And now? Now she was a headline. She reached her locker, spinning the combination lock with practiced ease. But before she could grab her books, a familiar voice called out from behind her. Amara. She turned to see Jada, one of the only friends she had at this school. Jada was bold where Amara was quiet, loud where Amara was measured. A girl who refused to be ignored, who wore her natural curls like a crown and had a confidence that radiated in every step. Girl, what happened this morning? Jada's eyes were wide with disbelief. I saw the video, your mom went off. Amara's stomach twisted. There's a video? Jada scoffed. Of course there is. Half the bus had their phones out. That mess is everywhere. Amara's heart pounded. How many people had seen it? Before she could say anything, Jada grabbed her phone, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward her. And there it was. A video, already with over 10,000 views, titled, Racist Bus Driver Attacks Black Student, Her Mom Claps Back Hard. Amara swallowed hard as she hit play. The video started right at the moment Mr. Callahan shoved her. It was a grainy recording, likely taken from the back of the bus, but it was clear. She saw herself hitting the ground. Heard the gasps. Then, her mother's voice, strong and unwavering, cutting through the silence. She watched as Linda marched forward, as she forced Callahan to back down, as she turned the tables on him so completely that he had no choice but to let Amara on the bus. And then the comments. This man needs to be fired immediately. Why do people like this still have jobs? That mom is a queen. What school does she go to? We need to make sure they take action. He should be arrested. Amara's breath hitched. This wasn't just a school incident anymore. It was a movement. A storm. And it was growing. Jada nudged her. Girl, this is big. Amara felt the weight of it now. She had wanted justice. But what she got was a revolution. And Mr. Callahan? He was about to learn what happens when you try to silence the wrong girl. Meanwhile, a man on the brink. Mr. Callahan gripped the steering wheel so hard his fingers ached. He hadn't even left the school parking lot yet. His whole body shook with rage. That woman. That brat. They thought they could ruin him. His phone buzzed. He snatched it off the dashboard, his hands clammy as he read the message from his supervisor. Principal Morgan wants to see you in his office. Now. His stomach twisted. He turned on the radio, hoping for a distraction, only to hear a news anchor's voice. And in breaking news, a viral video shows a school bus driver shoving a black student, sparking national outrage. Parents and activists are already calling for immediate action. Callahan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This wasn't just a scolding from his boss. This was the beginning of the end. And he wasn't going down without a fight. The tides turn. Mr. Callahan sat in the school's administrative office, his leg bouncing anxiously as he waited for the inevitable confrontation. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the room. The walls were lined with plaques and framed photos of past principals, their faces frozen in history, reminding him that authority existed long before him, and would exist long after he was gone. He gritted his teeth at the thought. The video had spread like wildfire. By the time he parked the bus in the school lot, he had already received 3 missed calls from the district office, a flood of messages from coworkers, and an email from his union rep. Worst of all, the news had picked it up. He was a headline now. And it wasn't the kind that got you praise. The door to Principal Morgan's office creaked open, and the stern-faced administrator stepped out. His tie was slightly loosened, his graying hair a little disheveled, signs that he had already been dealing with the fallout. "Mr. Callahan," Morgan said, his tone clipped. "Come in." Callahan swallowed hard but forced himself to appear unaffected. He wasn't going to be bullied by some kid and her loudmouth mother. He stepped inside, sinking into the chair across from the principal's massive mahogany desk. Morgan didn't waste time. "What the hell were you thinking?" The words hit like a slap, and Callahan flinched. Morgan's usual calm demeanor was gone. His brows were furrowed in frustration, his hands flat against the desk. I didn't do anything wrong," Callahan started, but Morgan cut him off with a sharp glare. "Don't even try it," the principal snapped. "I saw the video. The entire country has seen the video." Callahan's throat went dry. "I didn't. You shoved a student." "I was just keeping order," Callahan blurted. "She was causing a disruption. She was getting on the bus. Like every other student is entitled to do." Morgan exhaled heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his voice lower now, laced with exasperation. "We have parents calling non-stop. We have students protesting. We have the school board breathing down my neck." Callahan clenched his jaw. "They always blow things out of proportion," he muttered. Morgan's eyes snapped up, sharp as knives. "This isn't them, Callahan. This is you." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, finally, the principal leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the desk. "There's no saving this," he said flatly. "The district is already involved. The superintendent wants you gone. And frankly, so do I." Callahan stiffened. "Fired? Just like that?" "You're placing me on leave?" he asked, his voice uneven. Morgan shook his head. "No. You're terminated. Effective immediately." Callahan felt his stomach drop. This couldn't be happening. After 20 years in this job? He had seniority. He had a damn pension to think about. You can't do this," he stammered. Morgan arched a brow. "Watch me." For a brief second, Callahan thought about fighting back. Thought about calling his union rep, screaming at the top of his lungs, threatening lawsuits. But then his eyes flicked to Morgan's desk, where his termination papers were already printed out, waiting for his signature. They had come prepared. There was nothing he could do. Nothing, except sign. His hands shook as he scrawled his name across the paper. A signature that ended everything. Morgan didn't look the least bit sympathetic. "Turn in your keys. Your last paycheck will be mailed." That was it. Just like that, it was over. Callahan stood, his movements robotic. His career, his reputation, his entire life, gone in one morning. And at the center of it all? That girl. That damn girl. Meanwhile, the revolution gains power. Amara sat in the cafeteria, her tray of untouched food in front of her. Jada was next to her, scrolling through her phone with an amused look. "Girl, have you seen Twitter? They're eating this man alive." Amara exhaled, bracing herself. "How bad is it?" Jada turned her screen to show a trending hashtag. Hashtag Justice for Amara. The tweets flooded in beneath it. The fact that this girl had to fight for a seat on a public school bus is insane. Bus driver got exactly what he deserved. Shout out to Amara's mom for standing up for her daughter. More parents should be like this. He put his hands on a child. What's there to debate? Amara's chest tightened. It was surreal. Yesterday, she had been invisible. Today? Her name was on every news site, every social media feed, every conversation. Jada grinned. And guess what? Mr. Callahan just got fired. Amara's breath hitched. Her heart pounded. He was gone. Gone. No more waiting in fear every morning. No more humiliation. No more wondering if she'd even make it to school. It was justice. Real. Powerful. Undeniable justice. A strange sensation filled her chest, a mixture of relief, triumph, and something else. Determination. She had power now. And she wasn't going to waste it. Jada nudged her playfully. So, what's next? Amara glanced at the crowd of students, all watching her now. She had their attention. She had a voice. And she was going to use it. She stood, picking up her tray. Then, louder than ever before, she said, "We keep going." And as she walked away, she knew, this wasn't just her fight anymore. This was the beginning of a movement. A movement bigger than one girl. The next morning, Amara woke up to the sound of her mother's phone ringing, again. It had been ringing non-stop since last night, with calls from journalists, activists, school officials, and even local politicians. Everyone wanted a comment, a statement, something that would keep the fire burning. Linda answered the call in the kitchen, her voice calm yet firm. "Yes, this is Linda Davis. Yes, I'm aware of the media coverage. No, we are not making any rushed statements." She paused. "Because this isn't about attention. It's about justice. And I refuse to let my daughter be reduced to a headline when she's a person." Amara stood at the doorway, listening. She had never seen her mother like this before, not just defending her, but taking on an entire system. When Linda ended the call, she turned to her daughter. "You ready for school?" Amara hesitated. "Are you sure I should go today?" Her mother raised a brow. "And let them think they won? Let them think you're too scared to show your face?" Amara bit her lip. "It's not that I'm scared, I just—" "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Amara." Linda walked over, placing her hands on her daughter's shoulders. "You did something important. You made people see what's wrong. And now?" She smiled. "Now, we make sure they don't forget." Amara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. She was ready. A school transformed. The moment Amara stepped through the school gates, she knew everything had changed. There were protest signs being held up near the entrance, students wearing t-shirts with the hashtag Justice for Amara, and a group of kids handing out flyers with information about students' rights. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than her. Jada ran up, breathless. "Girl, it's wild in here. The news crews are in the parking lot. Teachers are watching everything, and the student council is planning a walkout. You're basically a celebrity now." Amara's stomach twisted. She never wanted this much attention. She just wanted a seat on the bus. But now? This was a movement. A group of students approached her, some she barely even knew. One of them, a tall boy with a serious expression, stepped forward. "Hey, Amara. We just wanted to say, what you did was brave. We're with you." Another girl nodded. "This school lets things slide too much. But not this time." One by one, they all voiced their support. And for the first time in her life, Amara didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Jada leaned in. "So, what's the plan? Because people are looking at you like you're their leader now." Amara swallowed. A leader? She hadn't signed up for that. She just wanted fairness, justice, respect. But then she thought about Callahan. She thought about all the other kids who had been ignored, bullied, or silenced. And she realized, she had a responsibility now. She couldn't just let this be another internet trend that people forgot in a week. She had to make sure real change happened. So, she turned to Jada and said, "We take this to the school board." Jada's eyes widened. "You serious?" Amara nodded. "They let Callahan work here for years, even when people complained. We need to make sure this never happens again." Jada grinned. "Now you're talking." Meanwhile, Callahan's new reality. Across town, Mr. Callahan sat at his worn-out kitchen table, staring at his phone. He had never felt this powerless before. The news articles had spread everywhere. His termination was official. His name was being dragged through the mud. People were doxing him, calling for him to be banned from working in schools. He had never imagined it would get this bad. A notification flashed on his phone screen. His bank account balance. His severance pay had already been cut off after the school board finalized his termination. Callahan clenched his fists. All because of that girl. He had been in control. He had been respected. And now? A teenager had ruined his entire life. But as he sat there, stewing in his anger, something became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about him anymore. There were people outside his house, protesters. And his own neighbors had started avoiding him. One thing was certain. There was no coming back from this. The meeting that would change everything. That afternoon, Amara, Jada, and several other students arrived at the school board office. The board members sat behind a long table, their expressions ranging from concern to exhaustion. One of them, an older woman with a clipboard, cleared her throat. "Miss Davis, what is it you're requesting?" Amara took a deep breath. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone. "We need a formal policy that prevents discrimination on school buses," she said firmly. "We need a direct line where students can report drivers who mistreat them." A board member sighed. "Miss Davis, the district already has anti-discrimination policies. Then why was Callahan allowed to keep driving for years?" Amara interrupted. "Policies don't mean anything if they're not enforced." Silence. Jada smirked. "She's got a point." Amara continued, her voice steady. "I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else. We need real accountability. Not just when it goes viral." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, the woman with the clipboard nodded. "We'll take your concerns seriously." Jada raised a brow. "That's not good enough. We need a real answer." The board chair sighed. "We'll draft a new student transportation policy and have a public review next month. You'll be invited to give input." A slow smile spread across Amara's face. This was just the beginning. The legacy begins. A week later, Callahan had disappeared. No one knew where he went. Some rumors said he left town. Others said he was hiding out, waiting for the news cycle to forget him. But Amara? She wasn't forgotten. Her story was still spreading. Her actions had started something bigger than she ever imagined. And as she stood outside the school gates that morning, watching students board the bus freely, without fear, she realized. She had changed the world. Even if just a little. But that was enough. Because one spark can light a fire. And Amara? She was just getting started.